Welcome back to another great edition of the Firehouse live on Blaze1Radio. I'm your host, NFLExporter, and if you're tuning in for the first time, you want to make sure to come and burn it down with us each and every Thursday from 7 to 8 p.m. as we discuss NFL and fantasy football. Now, this is our third show as we're entering the third week of the preseason for the 2014 NFL season. And if you happen to miss the first 2 weeks of the show, in which we broke down our fantasy football rankings for quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, defense, special teams, and kickers, you can simply go to youtube.com and in your search engine, type in NFLExporter on Blaze1Radio. The way that you spell NFLExporter is NFLExporter. That's all one word, and again, that's on Blaze1Radio. You also want to make sure to link up with us on our social networks. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, as well as LinkedIn and YouTube at NFLExporter. That's NFLExporter. And of course, you can find Blaze1Radio on Facebook and Twitter at Blaze1Media. That's BLAZE, the number 1 in the word media, MEDIA. Now today we have a fantastic show in store for you. We're going to be breaking down the entire NFC conference. And to get things started off, coming in at number 1 this season is the defending Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks only lost a couple players in the offseason, that being wide receiver Golden Tate and defensive end Chris Clemens, and so they're certainly in line to repeat as Super Bowl champions. Now, when you look at what this team is bringing to the table on the offensive side of the football, you have young star Russell Wilson, who's entering his third year. Last year, which was just his second year, he led the Seahawks to the Super Bowl, throwing 26 TD passes and only 9 interceptions. He also ran for another 500 plus yards on the ground. Wilson is a real good decision maker and just a big time player out there doing whatever needs to be done for this Seattle Seahawks team to succeed. They have running back Marshawn Lynch, who's one of the best in the business. Lynch has averaged over 1,300 rushing yards the past 3 seasons, which has really allowed Seattle to have big-time balance on offense. When you look at the wide receiver position, you have Percy Harvin, who missed the majority of last season due to an injury, but he's back fully healthy. He's one of the best playmakers in the NFL. And then you have a couple of solid wide receivers in Doug Baldwin and Jermaine Kearse. On the front line, the Seahawks have a couple of Pro Bowl players in center Max Unger and tackle Russell Okung. When we look on the defensive side of the football for the Seahawks, this is where they make their name. They have the vaunted secondary called the Legion of Boom with defensive back Richard Sherman and safeties Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor. You also have some talented linebackers in Bobby Wagner, KJ Wright, Bruce Irvin, and Malcolm Smith. And then bringing the pressure, you have Cliff Averill at defensive end. And I really like what the Seahawks did by going out and picking up Kevin Williams from the Minnesota Vikings. So when we take a look at the Seattle Seahawks team as a whole, especially when you factor in that wild crowd called the 12th man, if this team can stay healthy, they should certainly be in line at the end of the season to defend their Super Bowl title. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at some teams in the NFC who are a serious threat to the Seahawks returning to the Super Bowl. Once again, it's the NFLExporter live on Blaze1Radio. You're burning it down with the Firehouse. We'll be back in one moment. Thank you everyone for returning to another edition of the Firehouse live on Blaze1 Radio. I'm your host, the NFLExporter, and right now we're going to take a look at some teams in the NFC who are a serious threat for dethroning the defending Super Bowl champion, Seattle Seahawks. We start off with the San Francisco 49ers, who came up one play short of beating Seattle last year for an opportunity to go to the Super Bowl. Like Seattle, the 49ers are pretty much returning their same team from last year. Now they do have a couple obstacles to overcome on the defensive side of the football. The 49ers usually boast the best linebacking core in the NFL with Ahmad Brooks, Patrick Willis, Aldon Smith, and Navarro Bowman. This year, Smith and Bowman will miss some time. Now, Aldon Smith is going to miss a couple games. Right now, the league has not handed his suspension down. He had some off-the-field issues that he had to handle in the off-season, so we're waiting to hear about that. And then Navarro Bowman, who was an all-pro inside linebacker last year, suffered a bad ACL injury in the NFC Championship game versus Seattle. They're expecting him to be out until the second half of the season. And then San Francisco also has two new defensive backs. Terrell Brown and Carlos Rogers are now gone to the Oakland Raiders. But they do have Chris Culliver, who missed the entire last season for San Francisco. He'll be back in the starting lineup. And then you also have Tremaine Brock. When you look at what the 49ers have at safety, they lost Dante Whitner to the Cleveland Browns, but were able to bring in the savvy veteran Antoine Bethea from the Indianapolis Colts. And then Eric Reed had a stellar rookie season last year. He's in his second season. We expect for him to pay big dividends as well. Now, when you look on the offensive side of the football for the San Francisco 49ers, quarterback Colin Kaepernick received a huge deal in the offseason, and he has plenty of weapons around him. Now, when you look at what Colin Kaepernick did last season, passed for over 3,200 yards and 21 TDs to only 8 interceptions, also ran for another 500 plus yards on the ground. At his disposal, he has wide receiver Michael Crabtree, wide receiver Anquan Bolden, wide receiver Stevie Johnson, who they brought over from the Buffalo Bills during a trade, and they have one of the best tight ends in the NFL in Vernon Davis. They also have one of the best running backs in the NFL in Frank Gore, and the 49ers boast one of the best offensive lines, especially when it comes to running the football. So when I look at this 49ers team as a whole, they certainly have the weapons and pieces in place to compete with Seattle. I think that they're certainly going to have to make some adjustments to the pieces that they're missing on the defensive side of the football, with Aldon Smith and Navarro Bowman being gone. And then you also have two new defensive backs, so it could take their defense a little bit time to gel. But I think the offense is is as explosive as it has been in years, and they should certainly be able to carry the load until that 49ers defense gets back in the top form. Next, we have the New Orleans Saints. The Saints are another team who lost to the Seahawks in the playoffs last year. Now, we know that the Saints have one of the most explosive offenses in the NFL, led by quarterback Drew Brees. He has the best tight end in the NFL in Jimmy Graham. He also has wide receiver Marcus Colston, who's been a mainstay for some years now, a very productive wide receiver. And then they have a couple young guys in second-year wide receiver Kenny Stills and rookie Brandon Cooks. Now, the Saints did lose some of their firepower on offense, that being wide receiver Lance Moore, who went to Pittsburgh. They also lost Devery Henderson. And most importantly, they lost running back Darren Sproles, who accounted for 77 catches in his past 3 seasons while he was in New Orleans. He's now in Philadelphia. But when you have a quarterback like Drew Brees, who's got pinpoint accuracy and has been in the same offensive system for the last 4 to 5 or 6 years, you really don't have much to worry about. And I mentioned rookie Brandon Cooks. I expect for him to step in and take up a lot of the production that Darren Sproles took with him to Philadelphia. This guy's a big-time playmaker, and we've seen some dazzling things early from him this preseason. Now, the defensive side of the football has really been the weaker link for this New Orleans Saints team over the year, but they're certainly making strides to shore that up. Second-year defensive coordinator Rob Ryan is one of the best in the business, and he'll have some new schemes in place for his team this year. We'll be excited to see that. Defensive end Cameron Jordan is turning into one of the best defensive linemen in the NFL. On the second level, you have inside linebacker Curtis Lofton, who's very stout at stopping the run. And then I really like what the Saints are doing in their secondary. They brought over Champ Bailey from the Denver Broncos. We know that Bailey doesn't boast that same top-end 4.3 speed that he did as a youngster. But outside of that, he still has all the skills that you could ask for. And more importantly, he should be able to come over and learn his playbook pretty quick. On the other cornerback, you have Patrick Robinson, player they drafted out of Florida State a couple years ago, and Kendrick Lewis, who's been there for a couple years as well. And then I really like the tandem that they have at safety. Second-year player Kenny Vaccaro had an outstanding season last year as a rookie out of the University of Texas. And the Saints acquired free agent ball hawk and safety Jarius Byrd from the Buffalo Bills. So when I take a look at this New Orleans Saints team, if this defense can play much better than it did last year, and I will give them credit, when Rob Ryan came in last year, he certainly helped to turn that defense around. If that defense can step it up another level, that will certainly make amends for this team who's in place to make another Super Bowl run. And then I think running the football for New Orleans will be very important. They have running backs Pierre Thomas as well as Mark Ingram. And Ingram has looked excellent in the preseason, really finished last season strong. I think at some point in the season, you may see him in the starting lineup. And if the Saints offense and that explosive passing attack can make it happen on the ground as well, that will certainly be a big bonus for this New Orleans Saints team. Next, we have the Green Bay Packers. You know, they're led by all-pro quarterback Aaron Rodgers. He has some excellent pieces in place around him on offense. You still have wide receiver Jordy Nelson. You have wide receiver Randall Cobb. Both of those players have been there the last 3 seasons and have great rapport with Rodgers. And then you have second-year player Jared Boykin, who had a very successful rookie campaign last year. Running the football, and this is something that is new for the Packers. They now have a power running game with second-year player Eddie Lacy. Last year, Lacy had 1,178 yards and 11 TDs on the ground. And with that power running game, that should help to balance out this Packers offense to take some of the pressure off Aaron Rodgers, because the Packers offensive line has not been too good in pass protection over the last couple years. But with an effective running game, that'll certainly help Rodgers in play action pass. And we know he's one of the most efficient passers in the NFL. I also like what the Packers are bringing to the table on the defensive side of the football. It's really a collection of a lot of names, and you certainly need depth and you certainly need talent, and that's exactly what the Packers are bringing to the table. We know that Clay Matthews Jr. is one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. The Packers went out and got veteran Julius Peppers from the Chicago Bears. On the front line, they have B.J. Raji. He certainly needs to get back into the Pro Bowl form. We seen him a couple years ago when the Packers made their Super Bowl run. They have players like Nick Perry at outside linebacker, defensive end Dante Jones, and inside linebacker A.J. Hawk has been a mainstay for many years. When I look at the secondary, you have Tramon Williams, who certainly needs to step his game back up. He was another player who was really instrumental in that Super Bowl run for the Packers a couple years ago. They still have Sam Shields and Casey Hayward, 2 very good young defensive backs. And then I like the safeties and Morgan Barnett. And the Packers went out this year and spent their first-round pick on Ha-Ha Clinton-Dix, the safety from the University of Alabama. When I look at this Green Bay Packers team as a whole, if they can stay healthy, they certainly will be there at the end to push the Seattle Seahawks. And we're going to get a taste of what that matchup will look like as Green Bay heads to Seattle for the first game of the NFL season. So that will definitely be real exciting. The last team that I have is the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles won the NFC East division last year. They have a ton of talent on the offensive side of the football. They have running back LaShawn McCoy, who led the NFL in rushing last year with 1,609 yards. They brought over Darren Sproles from the New Orleans Saints. He's a player who can run the football, but is a huge mismatch catching the football out of the backfield. They also have wide receivers Riley Cooper and Jeremy Maclin. And then they also went out and drafted wide receiver Jordan Matthews out of the University of Vanderbilt. The Eagles also have one of the best offensive lines with some players like Todd Herminez, Lane Johnson, and Big Jason Peters. And then they have 2 good tight ends in Zach Ertz and Brent Selleck. Quarterback Nick Foles had one of the best seasons in NFL history last year, throwing 27 touchdowns and only 2 interceptions. Now, I don't expect for him to duplicate his only throwing 2 interceptions last year. I'd be shocked to see any quarterback do that, but he certainly should be able to build on those 27 TD passes in this wide open Chip Kelly offense. Now, the Eagles did lose wide receiver Deshaun Jackson to the Washington Redskins, but Jeremy Maclin is a player who missed the entire season last year due to injury. If he can stay healthy, he has just as much speed as Jackson, is a little bit bigger, and I think he can step in and do due diligence in that department. When we look on the defensive side of the football for the Philadelphia Eagles, you still have some mainstays in Trent Cole, Connor Barwin, and Fletcher Cox in that front seven. You have inside linebacker DeMeco Ryans, who's found himself after a pretty shaky start when he came over from Houston in 2012. And then you have Michael Kendricks. When I look at their secondary, they have some good players as well. Defensive back Kerry Williams and Brandon Boykin. And then at safety, you have Nate Allen, and I really like the Eagles going out and picking up safety Malcolm Jenkins from the New Orleans Saints. He should add some stability and a winning pedigree to that Philadelphia Eagles team. When I'm looking at the Philadelphia Eagles, I think the defense is the key to their success. I think they have all the weapons in place on offense, and if they can get that front seven together to be tough against the run, I do believe they have a good enough secondary to give Seattle a run for their money. That wraps up our first segment. When we return, we're going to take a look at 4 other teams who could possibly knock off Seattle or at least compete with San Francisco, New Orleans, Green Bay, and Philadelphia out in the NFC. It's the NFL Exporter live on Blaze 1 Radio. Don't touch that dial. What's up, everyone, and thank you for returning to the Firehouse live on Blaze 1 Radio. Now we're going to take a look at some teams in the NFC who should certainly be in competition for a playoff spot and possibly have an opportunity to knock off the defending Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks as well. First, we have the Chicago Bears. The Bears have one of the most prolific offenses in the NFL. You have Pro Bowl running back Matt Forte, who can get it done running the football as well as through the air. You have big-time wide receivers Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey. Those 2 guys produced the most yards receiving combined from wide receivers last year. You have tight end Martellus Bennett, who had over 700 yards receiving, and quarterback Jay Cutler. I really think that the success of the Chicago Bears offense is going to lean on him. Over the past few years, the Bears have been pretty bad at protecting the passer, but they've used a couple draft picks and have shored up that offensive line. And so I think that if Jay Cutler can just play within the offense, and I certainly think he's in place to do that, with head coach and offensive coordinator Mark Trestman calling the shots, I think that this Chicago Bears offense can be very efficient and one of the highest scoring in the NFL. Now, the defensive side of the football had been a calling card for this Bears defensive unit for so long. Last year, that was not the case. For the first time in over 10 years, they were without inside linebacker Brian Urlacher, who retired. They also got hit with a rash of injuries on their defensive line, and uncharacteristically, this Bears team was very easy to run on last year. Well, this year, I don't anticipate that being the case. The Bears went out and got defensive lineman Jared Allen from the Minnesota Vikings. We know that he's still one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. They still have Lance Briggs at outside linebacker, and they're hoping that DJ Williams, a veteran that they picked up from Denver a couple years ago, can be healthy. That would really help them out a lot stopping the run. He's only been able to play in 13 games over the past 2 seasons. And then when you look at the Bears secondary, they still have one of the best cornerback tandems in the league. I'm talking about Charles Peanut Tillman, who's a turnover machine, and the other cornerback is Tim Jennings. Both of those players made the Pro Bowl last year. Over the top is my concern with this Bears team. They really haven't had a lot of good safeties in there. They did go out and pick up veteran Adrian Wilson. He's not slated to start, but I think you will see him on the field sometime before the season is over, and I think he brings some veteran leadership to this team as well. When I'm looking at the Chicago Bears team, their first thing that they need to accomplish is winning their division, in which they have the Green Bay Packers, who have won that division for 3 straight years. I certainly think the Bears are in place to do that. I just think that if that defense, it has to be much tougher. They were very easy to run on last year. So if they can be tougher at stopping the run, they certainly have some guys in the secondary who can make some turnovers. And again, this offense is in place to put up a lot of points. I would not be shocked at all to see Chicago win the division this year, but it's going to be very tough because the Green Bay Packers are loaded. Next, we have the Washington Redskins. The Redskins have an excellent team on paper when it comes to offense, and I'm pretty confident that they can transition that over to production on the football field. We all know that Robert Griffin III had an outstanding rookie season back in 2012 before he got injured, and last year was really an anomaly because he was not at 100%. Even ownership has admitted in the offseason that they probably rushed him back too soon. But he's back fully healthy, and he has more weapons around him than he had back in 2012 when he threw 20 touchdowns and only 5 interceptions. He has Pierre Garçon and Deshaun Jackson, 2 of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Jackson came over from Philadelphia. Last year he had over 1,300 yards receiving and 9 touchdowns. And then Pierre Garçon last year had over 1,300 yards receiving with over 100 catches and 5 touchdowns. Those 2 are going to be very hard to stop on the outside. The Redskins also did a great job in bringing in Andre Roberts, who's a very underrated player. He'll be in the slot. He came over from the Arizona Cardinals. And then Jordan Reed is a good second-year tight end, battled with injuries, but when on the football field, he has the speed and size to be a big-time threat. The Redskins also boast one of the best running backs in the NFL with Alfred Morris, who's ran for over 2,800 yards and 20 TDs in his first 2 seasons. The keys to this offense obviously lie in the hands of RG3. If he can throw the ball as accurate as he did in his rookie season, in which he also ran for over 800 yards, the main thing with him, we know, is health. If he's learned his lesson, and I would be shocked if he has not by now, as much as he's heard people in the NFL media, I'm quite sure his coach, his family, everybody, I'm quite sure is encouraging this young man that when he takes off running the football, he simply needs to get out of bounds or slide or dive in enough time before defenders can lay big hits on him. I think he's learned his lesson. They also have a new head coach and offensive coordinator, Jay Gruden, who came over from the Cincinnati Bengals. I like what I see out of this Washington Redskins offense. I'm excited to see them play. The defensive side of the football definitely has been the weakness for this team over the last couple years. Last year they were ranked 31st against the pass, which certainly will not cut it. Now up front, they did go out and get defensive tackle Jason Hatcher from the Dallas Cowboys. He's a good upgrade. You still have Brian Orakpo and Ryan Kerrigan at outside linebacker. We know that Orakpo is one of the best pass rushers in the NFL, and Kerrigan certainly can get after the quarterback as well. They certainly have a hole to fill in the middle. For so many years, London Fletcher was an outstanding player and really the heart and soul and glue of this defense. He retired after 15 seasons, so they're certainly going to have to make up for his production and leadership. But I like what they did in going out and getting Ryan Clark, the safety from the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's the exact type of guy that you want to come into your locker room who can provide leadership and championship pedigree, as he won a couple of Super Bowls with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, the defensive backs for the Washington Redskins are D'Angelo Hall. We know that he's always good to get some interceptions and make some big plays. And then you have David Amerson, a second-year player who really had a solid rookie year last year. When I look at this Washington Redskins team, if they can put it all together, they certainly have a team that can push the Saints or the 49ers or the Packers or Philadelphia and possibly give Seattle a run for their money. Definitely excited to see what Washington's going to do this year. Next, we have the Arizona Cardinals. Yes, the Arizona Cardinals. That's right, I said it. Last year, even though they didn't make the playoffs, the Cardinals were a 10-win ball club. That goes to show you how deep the NFC is. They were 10-6 and could not make it to the playoffs. On the offensive side of the football, you have Larry Fitzgerald, the future Hall of Famer. He's still one of the best in the business. Third-year player Michael Floyd has made tremendous strides. Last year, he led the team with over 1,000 yards receiving. They brought in Ted Ginn Jr. from Carolina to be their third receiver, to give them a player with some speed who can stretch the field. I really like what he can do. I think the key for this Arizona Cardinals team is really between the offensive line, which has not done a good job at protecting or opening up holes in the running game. Veteran quarterback Carson Palmer certainly can deliver the football to those weapons on the outside that I spoke about, but again, he's got to get protection because he's not a mobile quarterback. Andre Ellington, the running back, is the guy that we're hearing the most about in the preseason. We know that he's a dual threat. He can certainly run the football, and he's very effective as a pass catcher. His head coach, Bruce Arians, said he thinks that he's good enough that he could actually be a wide receiver in the NFL. They like to split him out wide and get him in some matchups against safeties and linebackers. He's going to be the workhorse for this offense. Now, it is just his second year, so we have to make sure that he can handle the workload. And the NFC West is a very tough conference where you have 4 top 10 defenses in San Francisco, Seattle, and the Rams, as well as the Cardinals themselves. Andre Ellington is a player that we're certainly going to be keeping our eyes on because the Cardinals have big hopes for this young man who ran an 80-yard touchdown last year to show his speed and explosion, and he did have a game where he caught 8 passes in the game. When I look at this Arizona Cardinals offense, they certainly have the weapons, but that offensive line is going to have to play at a much higher level. On the defensive side of the football for the Arizona Cardinals, they have one of the best defensive lines that you can find. You have big tackle 6'8" Calais Campbell. You have Big Dan Williams sitting in the middle there at nose tackle 6'3", 320 pounds. And then the veteran perennial Pro Bowler Darnell Dockett. With these 3 guys up front, it's very difficult to run the football, and they can certainly get after the passer as well. The second level is where I'm concerned with this Arizona Cardinals team. Usually, all-pro linebacker Darrell Washington is there. He's going to miss the entire season due to a suspension. And so they have some older guys on the outside with John Abraham and Shauna Hennessy. Neither one of those guys are your typical outside linebackers. They're really defensive ends. So when it comes to getting out and pass coverage, I don't think that's an area of strength. But when it comes to rushing a passer, John Abraham certainly knows how to do that. They're going to be expecting their second-year player, Kevin Minter, to pay dividends at inside linebacker. They drafted him last year out of LSU. And with Washington gone, he's certainly going to have to step his game up. They also went out and got veteran Larry Foote from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Certainly an older player on his last leg, but between the tackles, I still think that he can make a lot of plays. The secondary, I absolutely love for the Cardinals. They already had lockdown corner Patrick Peterson, who received a big payday this offseason. They went out and got Antonio Cromartie from the New York Jets. Now the Cardinals have 2 shutdown cornerbacks, which should allow for a lot of flexibility on the front end for them. And then at safety, you have the Honey Badger, Tyrann Mathieu. Mathieu is still recovering from an injury, but he should be healthy early in the preseason, and I like what he brings to the table as a playmaker as well. This Arizona Cardinals team actually went into Seattle last year and won a football game, which is very difficult to do. They're in the same division with Seattle and will certainly have an opportunity playing them 2 times a year to knock them off. They're in the same division with the 49ers as well. I'm real anxious to see if the Cardinals can win 10 games again this season. Last, we have the Detroit Lions. The Lions are a team that have been knocking at the door the last couple years, but mistakes and mental errors and turnovers and penalties have killed this team time and time again. When you look on the offensive side of the football, the weapons are loaded. You have Calvin Johnson, who's the best wide receiver in the NFL. They went out and got Golden Tate, who won the Super Bowl last year with the Detroit Lions. They have some good tight ends in Joseph Furier, Brandon Pettigrew, and they went out and drafted Eric Ebron. And then at running back, you have Reggie Bush and Joyce Bell. Matt Stafford is one of the best passers in the NFL. He's averaged nearly 5,000 yards passing the past 3 seasons. But as I mentioned, it's been his turnovers and his silly mistakes that have really haunted this Detroit Lions team. Now, there's no question that this Detroit Lions offense is going to put up a lot of points. This should be one of the most exciting offenses to watch this upcoming season. On defense, I really like what the Lions have in their front seven as well. You have Ndamukong Suh and Nick Fairley, two very tough defensive tackles. Last year, they went out and drafted Ezekiel Ansai from Brigham Young University. He had a very good rookie campaign. At linebacker, you have Stephen Tulloch, who's a very underrated inside linebacker, as well as DeAndre Levy, a name that you may not know, but he was voted one of the top 100 players in the NFL this season by his peers. And then in the secondary, this is the area that's really weak for the Detroit Lions, and I think until they get this fixed, they will not be able to take it to the next level. They had an opportunity to bring in some top-tier cornerbacks the last couple years and neglected to do that. And I just don't think that that was a wise decision. Last year, they could have went out and got D. Milliner from the University of Alabama to come in. He was regarded as the best defensive back. They passed on him. And then this year, they had a hometown product in DeQuez Denard from Michigan State University, and they passed on him as well. And so when I look at the players in the secondary, second-year guy Darius Slay and veteran Rasheem Mathis, I certainly don't think these are players who are legitimate cornerbacks, but if that Detroit front seven can play tough enough, it will certainly make life a lot easier on the secondary, who I don't see holding up against the top passing teams in the NFL. All in all, I really like the addition of head coach Jim Caldwell. I think that Caldwell is really respected in that locker room. He's a mentor and great leader, and I'm thinking that he's going to come in there and help to clean up some of these silly mistakes that hold this Detroit Lions team back. The Lions are going to have to go out in the field and prove it, but they'll certainly have their opportunities as they're in the same divisions as the Bears and the Packers, who we mentioned as teams who will be contending for the Super Bowl this year. All right, that wraps up our teams who will be in contention for the playoffs and trying to knock off the defending champions Seattle Seahawks. When we come back, we're going to talk about the rest of the NFC. These are teams that I don't anticipate making the playoffs, but I don't think they'll be an easy out as well. It's the NFL Exporter. You're now listening to the Firehouse live on Blaze1 Radio. We'll be back in one moment. Thank you for returning to the Firehouse with your host, the NFL Exporter, live on Blaze1 Radio. And now we're going to take a look at the rest of the NFC. These are teams that I don't see making the playoffs, but they should not be an easy out by any means. First, we have the Carolina Panthers. Last year, the Panthers won the NFC South Division, but lost in the playoffs to the San Francisco 49ers. We all know that the Carolina Panthers are led by Cam Newton, who's one of the brightest stars in the NFL, as well as the face of their franchise. Now, Newton has his work cut out for him this year. He has all brand new wide receivers. The only returning player in the passing game from last year is tight end Greg Olsen, and Olsen is certainly an elite tight end. I'm quite sure Cam Newton's going to be looking for him early and often as a safety blanket in the passing game. When we talk about these new wide receivers, no longer is Steve Smith there. He's now in Baltimore. I know that's very unusual. We've seen Smith the last 10 years out in Carolina. Replacing him, you have rookie wide receiver Calvin Benjamin, who they picked up from Florida State. They drafted him to come in and replace Smith, so he has his work cut out. But I love this guy's size. He's 6'5", 240 pounds, and he should be a big-time threat, especially in the red zone. They also brought in some veterans in Jericho Cotchery, Taquan Underwood, and Jason Avant from the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, those aren't big names at all. We know that Cam Newton has certainly not shown the accuracy as a pocket passer at this point in his career. He's certainly improved on that each and every year. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not the type of player, the type of analyst who's going to knock Cam Newton for what he doesn't do. He does a ton of things extremely well. I think he's a great team leader. He obviously can get it done running the football, using his feet. But I think that this is going to be a year where we're going to really see what he's about, because when you don't have a lot of talent at wide receiver, he's certainly going to have to be accurate with the football in order for this team to be successful in the passing game. Now behind him, he has some running backs who are still pretty good, but they're aging, and injuries are also a concern. Now, D'Angelo Williams is the running back who I'm speaking of, who's aging. He's been there for many years now. He'll actually turn 32 this year. Has certainly lost a step, but I still think that he can be an effective runner. Then Jonathan Stewart, to me, is the guy who really is the better running back, but he has a big-time problem staying on the football field due to injuries. Has already missed a couple weeks in training camp thus far. If he can get on the football field, that will be a huge boost for this running game. The Panthers also lost their Pro Bowl tackle Jordan Gross to free agency. And so when I look at this Carolina Panthers offense, there's certainly a lot of adjustments that will need to be made with a brand new set of wide receivers and a blue chip offensive lineman being gone. But again, as I mentioned, Cam Newton has an opportunity to really show he's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL if he can round up the troops and make this Carolina offense go. On the defensive side of the football, this is where the Carolina Panthers' strength is. In their front seven, you have returning defensive player of the year, inside linebacker Luke Kuechly. He certainly is a big-time playmaker. He can stop the run. He can get after the quarterback. He forces fumbles. He can drop back and cover tight ends and running backs. It's a real joy watching him play. You have outside linebacker Thomas Davis. He was able to get back to full health last year. That paid big dividends for this defense. I really love their front line. You have Charles Johnson and Greg Hardy, two defensive ends who really can get after the quarterback. And then last year, the Panthers drafted Star Luatelli from the University of Utah. The big defensive lineman came in immediately and was a rock in the middle of that defensive line. The secondary is the area that's a little bit questionable, but the secondary last year didn't have any big names either, and they were able to make it work. If that front seven can be as stout as it was last year, I'm quite sure they can do patchwork on the back end. When I look at this Carolina Panthers team, they certainly have the ingredients to get back to the playoffs, but the teams that I have listed ahead of them, I think have a little bit more firepower and a better opportunity. But Cam Newton is certainly not a guy that I would count out, and I think that the Carolina Panthers will be very, very difficult to beat this year. Next, I have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Buccaneers are another team that I like their balance. On the offensive side of the football, they do have some new additions, so it may take a little bit time to gel. They brought over quarterback Josh McCown from the Chicago Bears, so he'll now be the starting quarterback. They're expecting him to come in and provide leadership and be accurate with the football. The Buccaneers also spent their first-round draft pick on wide receiver Mike Evans out of the University of Texas A&M at 6'5". Evans is a big-time target and will certainly be effective in the red zone. Now, Evans is going to be pairing up with another big receiver in 6'5" Vincent Jackson. Jackson has been stellar in his first two seasons in Tampa Bay since coming over from the San Diego Chargers, averaging around 1,300 yards receiving and about 8 touchdowns. When you look in the backfield, there's some serious depth there. Now, we know that running back Doug Martin had a great rookie season in 2012, but last year was a big disappointment as his season ended early. He missed the last 10 games of the NFL season, and through the first 6 had only 1 touchdown. So he's certainly looking to rebound. But while he was out, the Buccaneers discovered some hidden gems. Second-year running back Mike James had a nice rookie campaign until he got injured. And then behind him came in third-year player Bobby Rainey from Western Kentucky. And he reminded me a lot of Darren Sproles with his size and his ability to cut and make defenders miss. So now the Buccaneers have some serious depth at running back. They also have a lot of depth at the tight end position as well. They brought over veteran Brandon Myers. They have second-year player Tim Wright, who had a very good rookie season. And then they went out and drafted tight end Austin Seferian-Jenkins, who's a dynamic playmaker as well. And so I think that this Buccaneers offense has all the ingredients to be successful. But again, you have a lot of new players. You also have a new head coach in Lovie Smith, certainly a guy who I think will have his team disciplined and ready to play. But on the offensive side of the football, the chemistry, again, may take a little while to come together. But I certainly like the pieces that they have in place. On the defensive side of the football, I think they're just as balanced. Defensive tackle Gerald McCoy finally found his groove last year and made it to his first Pro Bowl after kind of coming up empty his first 3 years in the NFL. You have Chris Claiborne at defensive end, and then they went out and got pass rushing specialist Michael Johnson from the Cincinnati Bengals. I really like that. On the second level, you have all-pro linebacker Levante David, who's another underrated name you might not know about, but was voted one of the top 100 players in the NFL this year. And then their safeties are really good. I like Mark Barron. He's entering his third season at the University of Alabama. And the guy who certainly has to step up is Deshaun Goldson. Goldson was a Pro Bowl performer for the San Francisco 49ers, came over last year, and his impact just wasn't felt. He had a lot of penalties for head hunting and roughing up defenders, and I certainly understand the player wanting to intimidate players and kind of make his mark on the team, but there's still a way that you can do it. A lot of his penalties really hurt the Buccaneers. I think if he can clean his act up and get back to the level of play that he had in San Francisco, it will certainly benefit this Tampa Bay Buccaneers team. The Buccaneers are another team that I think if they can put it all together, they certainly have a formula that could produce a playoff season. Next, I have the St. Louis Rams. Now, the Rams don't have the best set of offensive weapons, but they're very tough on defense. You have Robert Quinn at defensive end. He led the NFL in sacks last year. You also have Chris Long, who has a high motor and can get after the quarterback as well. Second-year player Michael Brockers from the University of LSU had an outstanding rookie season. And then they went out and drafted defensive tackle Aaron Donald from the University of Pittsburgh. So you look at the Rams front four on defense, and these are certainly some players who can make life difficult on opposing running backs and quarterbacks when they drop back to pass. On the second level, James Laurinaitis is a very good inside linebacker, and I love Alec Ogletree, who's entering his third year from the University of Georgia. This guy's a big-time playmaker. He could do it all. He can get after the quarterback, he can stop the run, and he can drop back and cover running backs and tight ends in the passing game. Very exciting player. I also like defensive back Janoris Jenkins, but this rest of the secondary is suspect, in my opinion. They did lose veteran Cortland Finnegan in free agency to the Miami Dolphins, so I think that this secondary has his work cut out and is going to have to step up in a major way. But they're another team who, even on the back end, it's not that well like Carolina. They have a front seven in place that can definitely be stout and make life a lot easier on that secondary. When we look on the offensive side of the football, the key is Sam Bradford staying healthy. Last year, prior to being injured for the rest of the season through the first 7 games, Sam Bradford had 14 touchdown passes and only 4 interceptions. This guy is very accurate with the football, but has had big-time trouble staying healthy in his first 4 years in the NFL. Now, I'm not too high on the weapons that he has in the passing game. It's a lot of wide receivers who are unproven at this point. Guys like Austin Pettis, Chris Givens, Brian Quick. They brought over Kenny Britt, a veteran from the Tennessee Titans. We know that none of these guys at this point have had any success in the NFL as a wide receiver. You also have Tavon Austin, and that's the player that they're going to be depending on. They moved up in the draft last year and grabbed Austin at number 8 overall. He got off to a very slow start, but towards the end of last season, he found his stride and is a big-time playmaker. He's one of the fastest players I've seen in the NFL in a very long time, and if you can get this guy out in space, he's very difficult to get a hand on. And so Sam Bradford really needs for him to step his game up, and he's certainly one of the most exciting players to watch in the NFL when he gets his hands on the football. And then in the backfield, the Rams finally were able to find a running back to replace longtime Rams legionnaire Steven Jackson, who moved on to Atlanta last year. You have running back Zach Stacy, had a very successful rookie campaign with 973 rushing yards and 7 TDs. And then they went out and drafted Trey Mason, who was a beast last year at the University of Auburn. Now, the Rams have one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, especially when you look at the left side with All-Pro Jake Long. They went out and spent their first-round pick, the Rams did, on Greg Robinson, the stud offensive lineman from University of Auburn. He's a tackle, but he's going to start his career off at guard until he can make that transition. And then you have veteran Scott Wells at center. And so although the weapons aren't there in the passing game for the Rams, they have a good enough team. And Jeff Fisher is a head coach who certainly has had success in the NFL. He really makes sure that team plays hard on a week in and week out basis. I think the Rams need some more weapons in the passing game. But again, they're going to be very, very competitive this year if Sam Bradford can stay healthy. Next, we have the Dallas Cowboys and the Atlanta Falcons. These teams mirror image each other very much so. They both have very explosive offenses. When you look out in Dallas, you have Tony Romo, you have Dez Bryant, you have Jason Witten, you have second-year wide receiver Terrence Williams, and you have running back DeMarco Murray. Those skill position players are certainly top 10 at their respective positions, with the exception of Williams, who's again is a second-year guy, but certainly Dez Bryant, certainly Jason Witten, certainly DeMarco Murray and Tony Romo, when they're playing at a high level, are certainly top 10 players at their respective positions. And the Cowboys have done a nice job at drafting some offensive linemen over the past couple years to help bolster their front line as well. The issue is on the defensive side of the football. They just don't have the firepower. They lost DeMarcus Ware. They lost Orlando Scandrick for a couple games due to off-the-field issues. They also lost their best playmaker on the second level in defensive back Sean Lee. And so this Dallas Cowboys defense, on paper, coming into the season, it doesn't look like it's going to be able to stop anybody. And the same holds true out in Atlanta. On offense, big-time playmakers. You have Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, Roddy White, Steven Jackson. And I'll even throw in there Harry Douglas, who had 85 catches and over 1,000 yards last year with Julio Jones out the lineup. The challenges for the Atlanta Falcons offense, first and foremost, future Hall of Fame tight end Tony Gonzalez retired. So they're going to have to find a way to make up for his production. But as I mentioned, last year, Harry Douglas did have 85 catches. I think he can step in because Atlanta's going to go a lot of three wide receiver set to try to replace Gonzalez. So I think he's capable of handling that. You want to watch out for injuries, though. Last year, Julio Jones missed 11 games with a foot injury. Roddy White had a nagging hamstring that didn't have him at 100% until the tail end of last year. And then Steven Jackson is a running back who I still think has gas left in the tank, but he missed a lot of time last year due to injury. Unfortunately for the Falcons this year, they lost their starting tackle, Sam Baker, due to an injury in a preseason game a couple days ago in the loss to the Houston Texans. So they're certainly going to have to make amends for that. Lucky for them, they went out and drafted Jake Matthews, one of the top tackles in college football from last year out of Texas A&M. He's going to slide out from the guard position over to the tackle position. But this Atlanta Falcons offense is certainly explosive, but they need to stay healthy. That is certainly the key. Defensively, like the Cowboys, it just doesn't look good for this team right now. When I'm looking at the names that they have, Jonathan Babineau, he's a good defensive tackle. I'll give him credit for that. Not too high on their linebackers. They took a big loss with Sean Weatherspoon, who's one of the better inside linebackers. He's going to miss the entire season due to injury. Croy Bierman and O.C. Umenyiora are not your traditional outside linebackers. Both of these guys are defensive ends, and so they'll have their opportunities when it comes to rushing the passer. But as far as stopping the run and defending tight ends and running backs, that's certainly not their specialty. And then when you look in the secondary, you have a couple second-year guys. Now, I'll be anxious to see what they do. You have Desmond Trufant and Stevie Alford. Again, both of these guys got a lot of experience last year, and they'll continue to grow. I think you'll take the mistakes that they make in their learning curve, because 2 or 3 years from now, if these guys can continue to make progressions, they have an opportunity to be one of the best young defensive back tandems in the NFL. But obviously, in their second year, they're still learning, so you expect them to have some struggles. And then at safety, you have William Moore, who's a hard hitter, but not the best in coverage. The Cowboys and Falcons, like I said, mirror images of each other, definitely have a lot of offensive firepower, but I don't think they have defenses that will sustain and help them make a playoff run this year. Last two teams that we have in the NFC, the Minnesota Vikings, the New York Giants. Now, the Vikings, I think, are a real enigma here. They certainly have some nice pieces in place on the offensive side of the football. It all starts with running back Adrian Peterson, who's the best pure running back in the NFL. He's a threat to run for 2,000 yards any season. He's coming in with a lot of motivation. You have Greg Jennings, Cordell Patterson, Jerome Simpson at wide receiver. Those guys are very capable. And then you have tight end Kyle Rudolph, who lost some weight in the offseason, and he looks very good. Right now, the Vikings are having a quarterback battle between rookie Teddy Bridgewater and veteran Matt Castle, so we'll have to see how that situation works out. I wouldn't count either guy right now as an elite quarterback, but if they can work within the system, I certainly think that head coach Mike Zimmerman has a system in place where these guys can thrive, especially when you have a running back with the likes of Adrian Peterson. On the defensive side of the football, this obviously is the Vikings' weakness, but they certainly have some players who may be able to step up and make some changes like we've seen them do unexpectedly when they made the playoffs back in 2012. Now look, on the front line, you have defensive ends, Everson Griffin and Brian Robisky. They went out, the Vikings did this year, and drafted Anthony Barr. Now I know coming into the draft, all the talk was about Jadeveon Clowney, rightfully so, and Khalil Mack out of the University of Buffalo. But Anthony Barr is a guy who I think has a lot of upside and potential. I'm hearing a lot of great things coming out of the Vikings training camp about him. He's certainly a player that you want to keep your eye on. Remember the name, Anthony Barr. He's a defensive end who can stop the run and excels at rushing the passer. They still have Chad Greenway. He's still one of the better outside linebackers in the NFL. And then when you look at their secondary, you have second-year player Xavier Rhodes, who still obviously will be learning on the job. And then they brought over Captain Mullerland from the Carolina Panthers. And then at safety, you have Harrison Smith. Now, Smith missed a lot of last year, but in his rookie season in 2012, he did a good job at being a playmaker in that secondary. Obviously, the Vikings are going to have to get pressure on quarterbacks and their defensive backs. That secondary is going to have to play well, because you're going to be facing Calvin Johnson in that explosive Detroit Lions offense twice a year. You're going to be facing Aaron Rodgers twice a year, and you're going to be facing Jay Cutler, who has Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey, the top wide receiver tandem in the NFL, twice a year. So, this Minnesota Vikings team has some good pieces in place, but I don't think this season they're quite ready to step up and make a push at the playoffs. But again, by no means will they be an easy out. The last team in the NFC, the New York Giants, I'm sad to say it, but I think this is going to be another year where the Giants struggle. The Giants ceiling caved in on them last year unexpectedly, and by the time the season was over, Eli Manning led the NFL with 27 interceptions. We've seen Victor Cruz not play at the level that we're accustomed to seeing him play at, and the Giants' running game sputtered as well. This year they have a new offensive coordinator, so it's taking some time for them to learn the system. They haven't looked sharp, the Giants' offense in preseason thus far. Some of the other names that they have on offense is Ruben Randall. He'll be starting at wide receiver, replacing Hakeem Nicks, who's now with the Indianapolis Colts. They went out and drafted Odell Beckham Jr., who unfortunately hasn't been able to play thus far in the preseason as he's nursing a hamstring injury. And then they have two new running backs in Rashad Jennings, who came over from Oakland, and they went out and drafted Andre Williams, who led the NCAA in rushing last year at Boston College. And so, this team is going to be trying to gel this thing together pretty quickly. But when you have so many new weapons on offense, or I should say so many new players on offense, you certainly can understand the transition. I just don't see it happening for the Giants this year. I think this is going to be another year where they struggle. They just don't have the players in place on the offensive side of the football to put up consistent points on a week in and week out basis. And then when you look at the Giants defense, I think we can still be optimistic. Jason Pierre-Paul a couple years ago was regarded as one of the top defensive ends in the NFL. His play fell off tremendously last year, so he has to earn that respect and get his reputation back. They still have John Beeson at linebacker. He's up in age, but certainly had glory days in Carolina. He has some gas left in the tank. And then I think the secondary can be a strength for the Giants if they can stay healthy. Now, Prince Amukamara has been there a couple years. He's struggled to stay on the field. He's already gotten injured again in the preseason, but they do have some good depth this year. They brought over Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie from the Denver Broncos. And they also brought over Walter Thurman from the Seattle Seahawks. And then at safety, Antrell Rolle is still one of the best in the business. Again, overall, when I look at this New York Giants team, yeah, certainly if they can put it all together, they can contest and fight in that NFC East division. But I think when we be realistic with their expectations, we're not expecting much from the New York Giants. I think this, again, will be another year where that offense will struggle and it'll just kind of compound throughout the rest of the team. Frustration is already building early. We'll see how it goes. All right, that wraps up this segment. Once again, it's the NFL Exporter live on Blaze One Radio. When we come back, we're going to wrap up our show by just taking another comb through each team and seeing what questions need to be answered as they come into the 2014 season. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back, everybody, to the Firehouse with your host, the NFL Exporter, live here on Blaze One Radio. Once again, make sure you come and burn it down with us each and every Thursday from 7 to 8 p.m. here on Blaze One Radio. Again, if you happen to miss the show, you can simply go to youtube.com and in the search engine, type in NFL Exporter on Blaze One Radio, and you'll be able to see everything that you missed. And then once again, you definitely want to make sure to link up with us on social media. For myself, you can find me on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and my YouTube channel is NFL Exporter. That's NFLExporter. And then, of course, you want to hook up with Blaze One Radio on Facebook and Twitter, and you'll find them at Blaze One Media. That's BLAZE, the number 1 in the word media. All right, to round out the show, we're just going to go through the 16 teams in the NFC and look at some questions that need to be answered coming into the season. For the Seattle Seahawks, last year they were the team who were hunting everybody down. They took a tough playoff loss to Atlanta in 2012. This year, they're coming in as the Super Bowl champions. So we're going to see if they can handle the pressure of being hunted. You know that every single week, no matter what team it is that they're playing, that team is going to come out and give it their all and really try to knock off the Seahawks. For the San Francisco 49ers, the question remains, can they win in Seattle? It's been a long time since San Francisco's been able to go up to Seattle and win that game. They're in the same division with Seattle, so they'll have an opportunity in the regular season. And to be completely honest, that is very well what it probably will come down to in the NFC if you look at some of these teams and how well they play at home. And so if the situation works out to where San Francisco has to go to Seattle come playoff time, they've got to be able to beat the Seahawks, but they haven't done it in a long time. I think that's a question that we look forward to seeing when San Francisco goes to Seattle in the regular season. Next, for the New Orleans Saints, have they put enough pieces in place on the defensive side of the football to be able to contend for another Super Bowl? Again, they brought in the likes of Champ Bailey. They went out and got Jarius Byrd from the Buffalo Bills. Last year they added rookie safety Kenny Vaccaro, who came in and had an outstanding rookie season. Curtis Lofton is a good player at linebacker. And Cameron Jordan is certainly stepping his game up at defensive end. You have defensive coordinator there, Rob Ryan. So, the question certainly remains for this New Orleans Saints team. We know that offense can put up a ton of points, but is that defense ready to play well enough to get the Saints back to the Super Bowl? Next, out in Green Bay, Are they ready to make a real playoff run? Ever since the Packers won the Super Bowl a couple years ago, they've been ousted out 2 straight years by the San Francisco 49ers. So, have the Packers put enough pieces in place on the defensive side of the football? I know quarterback Aaron Rodgers was quoted in the preseason as saying that he feels this is the toughest team that the Green Bay Packers have had in the last couple years. So it'll be real interesting to see if the Green Bay Packers can get out of the first round and make a real playoff push this year. For the Philadelphia Eagles, we're anxious to see, is this team ready to solidify itself as one of the best teams in the NFC conference? Over the past 3 seasons, there have been 3 different teams to win the NFC East. The Giants won it in 2011, the Redskins won it in 2012, and then Philadelphia won it last year. And so is there going to be a changing of the guard? Or is this Philadelphia Eagles team put enough pieces in place to win a division in back-to-back years and be considered a Super Bowl contender moving forward every year for the next couple years? They have a lot of young talent, and I certainly think that if they can win that division again, we can truly count them as being a Super Bowl contender for the next couple years moving forward. But we'll see if they can make that happen. For the Chicago Bears, they have the task of knocking off the Green Bay Packers. The Packers have won that NFC North division for 3 straight years, and so if the Bears want to make it in the playoffs, I think that winning that division is the easiest way to do that. And so they certainly had the pieces together on the offensive side of the football. They've added a couple pieces on defense. It'll be real interesting to see if Chicago is ready to take over as that division winner. For the Washington Redskins, similar situation. They have a really explosive offense, but have they done enough on the defensive side of the football to make the playoffs this year? As I mentioned, on offense, you have RG3, you have Deshaun Jackson, you have Pierre Garçon, Andre Roberts, Jordan Reed. At running back, you have Alfred Morris. You have all the pieces in place. But is that defense ready to do what's necessary to be able to take that Redskins team to the next level? That's certainly going to be something that we're going to be watching all throughout the season. For the Arizona Cardinals, was last year just a fluke, or is this a legitimate 10-win team? They're another team that pretty much brought back all their players from last year, and it's going to be interesting to see if they'll drop to below 500, or is this Arizona Cardinals team the truth, and can they win 10 ball games again? Next, you have the Detroit Lions. Are the Lions ready to cut down on all the silly mistakes, all the turnovers, all the fumbles, all the penalties, all the unexpected errors? Is this team finally going to pull itself together and be able to make a legitimate run at the playoffs? Again, I think that their former coach, Jim Schwartz, he was not the guy to provide discipline for this team, but I do think their new head coach, Jim Caldwell, is the perfect guy for that job. And I really think that he can come in there and just help this team play clean football, which a lot of times in the NFL, whether you believe it or not, but not turning the ball over and not making silly mistakes is the difference between winning and losing a ball game. For the Carolina Panthers, we know they have a stout defense, but is Cam Newton and his offense going to be able to move the football and put up enough points to produce enough wins for this Carolina Panthers football team? As I mentioned, Cam Newton has all new wide receivers, and the running game is a little suspect because Jonathan Stewart is injury prone and D'Angelo Williams isn't the running back that he used to be. And so there's a lot of onus on Cam Newton. Can he become that leader? Can he become that elite quarterback and lead this team back to the playoffs and lead an offense that on paper looks pretty low budget? When we look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, this is a team that on the offense and defensive side of the football, on paper, you can see a recipe and a formula that can present this team with an opportunity to make the playoffs. But again, they have a new head coach, you have a new starting quarterback, you have a new starting wide receiver. And so there's certainly some things, on the chemistry level that needs to take place. But like Jim Caldwell, I certainly think that Lovie Smith is a well-respected coach. He's always been a coach that his players really like. We know he had a great deal of success out in Chicago, even taking that team to the Super Bowl a couple years ago. And so, we're going to see, can this Tampa Bay Buccaneers take the talent that they have on paper and transition that over into production on the football field? When we look at the St. Louis Rams, I think the biggest step for them forward would be to have an above 500 season. This team has constantly been 5-11, 6-10, 7-9, losing records season after season after season for so long. I think that, they have some good talent there. It's going to be interesting to see if the St. Louis Rams are able to get to 9-7 and have an above 500 type season. When we look at the Dallas Cowboys and the Atlanta Falcons, can either one of these teams' defenses play well enough to allow their teams an opportunity at the playoffs? As we mentioned, the Cowboys, Tony Romo, Dez Bryant, Jason Witten, DeMarco Murray. You look at the Atlanta Falcons, Matt Ryan, Roddy White, Julio Jones, Steven Jackson. The names are certainly there, and these are players who have been very productive in their NFL careers. Offense is not the worry for these teams, but on defense, these teams appear to be very weak. We're going to see if either one of these defenses can step up well enough to complement offenses that are very capable of putting up a lot of points on the scoreboard. Then lastly, for the Minnesota Vikings, they're another team like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where you certainly can see a lot of talent on paper. But are they going to be able to transition that over to the football field? Like I said, potentially have a rookie starting quarterback. The Vikings are another team with a new head coach. Mike Zimmerman has his work cut out. We're going to see if he can lift his team up and do what Leslie Frazier did a couple years ago in 2012 and take this team to the playoffs. And then lastly, for the New York Giants, will this team be able to get above 500? Again, last year was a dismal season. This was a very disappointing season. This New York Giants team has a new offensive coordinator, brand new weapons on offense. The defense I can see playing well enough to keep them in some ball games, but is this offense going to be able to put up enough points? Can this offense be efficient enough? Can Eli Manning be accurate enough with the football and stop throwing so many interceptions to allow this Giants team to be competitive this year? Those are all questions that I would like for people to think about. Feel free, again, to hit us up on Twitter or Facebook to ask questions. We certainly, throughout the course of the season, would like to get feedback and interaction with our fans. And for next week's show, if you hit me up on Facebook or hit me up on Twitter, again, that's at NFLExporter, NFLExporter. Let me know what you think. Answer some questions. Give me some feedback and let me know what you're thinking out there. As always, we got to shout out New York, got to shout out Atlanta, got to shout out LA, got to shout out worldwide. It's the Firehouse live on Blaze1 Radio. NFLExporter signing off until next week. Make sure to come and burn it down with us again, 7 o'clock each and every Thursday, 1100.